Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to Practical Tips for Industrial Cybersecurity in 2021. We're grateful you could join us and hope that you'll be able to take away many useful pieces of information for enhancing your current or future networking environment. So my name's Luke Stevenson. I'm Business Manager for Enterprise Automation. Today we have Alex Coker, Controls Engineer 3 with Enterprise Automation, and Michael Cochran with Moxa. Enterprise Automation is a full-service automation consulting and systems integration firm. Moxa is an industrial networking device and software manufacturer. And together, we hope to provide some key insights and perspectives into what makes industrial networking more secure and ultimately more valuable for end users. So we will be having a Q&A session at the end. Please utilize the question and answer section of the webinar. Lob your questions there throughout the material, and we'll go and address those at the end, but it's great to collect those as we go. So yeah, without further ado, we'll jump right in. Alex, I'll kick it over to you.
All right. Hi, everyone. All right, next slide. All right, so I want to start by talking about why you want to build a strong and capable industrial network. So first of all, a industrial network really serves as your automation foundation. A capable network architecture builds that strong backbone for your automation hardware, especially nowadays as Ethernet connected devices really are becoming the new standard. And because of that, that then allows you to utilize the latest and greatest that's out there and trust that it's going to work and work reliably. The second reason is a strong industrial network is one that's robust and scalable. It's designed to be expandable and adapt to your changing requirements, and also flexible enough to allow for modernization of your existing assets over time to be able to take advantage of these new technologies. Next, a capable network architecture is one that's also inherently secure and actively defendable. For example, only known traffic traverses the network, only known software is used, only strict user access is followed, everything else is blocked or disabled by default. And this is an absolute must-have with the ever-increasing risk of today's threat landscape that's out there. Next, another important part is secure remote access. This is not only for operations, but for integrators, manufacturers support as well. And this is just honestly the new reality after what we've all experienced this past year. And finally, a strong and capable network provides you the opportunity to increase access to your data, collect more data, and then also provide that data to more and more people. And more data brings better analytics and insight, and ultimately to process improvement and savings because of that. So why don't we always get this right? Well, same reasons that apply to any other project or anything else. It's cost, time, effort, expertise. Now, some of you may say, my IT department handles my OT network, and that's great. But there are some key differences between IT and OT networks, because they serve different purposes, different goals. And there's some things that need to be understood there. And so if they're not understood, that can often be where friction points occur between the two groups. And I just want to highlight some of those differences. OT networks, the goal with that is no downtime, 100% uptime, 100% reliability. Those networks and the devices that run on them may often have a 10+ year lifespan. They oftentimes use proprietary or specialized hardware and software. And again, performance is key here because performance is time sensitive. We're talking, in the millisecond range of reactions for automation events and things like that. And ultimately, what they serve is to protect human safety and maintain production. Now, if we compare that to what a typical IT or business network and its goals are, minor downtime is actually acceptable for that sort of thing. If email stops working for an hour, so be it. It's not the end of the world. Typically, their hardware and software lifespans are in the 3 to 5 year time range, and they're using commercial off-the-shelf hardware and software. It's widely used widely used items there. And performance, again, the key there is a best effort. It's not a key goal or tenet of the operation of the system. It's just a best effort for performance. And then typically their goal is to contrast not a safety and production goal, but rather just a preventing data loss, maintaining integrity, maintaining the business operations, and that sort of thing. Next. And so we really encourage a tight partnership between the OT and IT groups, and a qualified integrator partner is someone who can help you facilitate this. And so today, what I really want to talk about then to get into the meat of this is 9 key concepts that you can use to build and secure your OT network. And I'm going to go through each one of these in detail. So first, to start with, the Purdue Enterprise Reference Architecture. So this is a standardized architecture for building an inherently secure network. And the most important concept that this tries to achieve is that of network segmentation. So a typical insecure network will be a so-called flat network, meaning all the devices are connected on a single network. So kind of based on that graphic there, if you imagine all of those things that are shown there, they're just all in one single level or color band. A well-architected network, however, will have devices separated into different segments or functional zones based on what they do. And so to kind of like highlight what this graphic has here, from the bottom up, that first level, level 0, the green one, that represents your physical process, your instrumentation, motors, essentially all of your field equipment. The next level up is the control layer, so your PLCs and other control hardware. The next level is your actual SCADA software, your servers, your clients, your engineering workstations, and that sort of thing. And then the next level above that is kind of the back-end operations of the system. So that could be things like domain controllers, management servers, and that sort of thing that help run the actual SCADA system. And then we kind of have this unique little level in between, that level 3.5 level that's yellow there. And that's a DMZ, or demilitarized zone network. And that's a network that serves a very specific purpose that sits between the SCADA networks below and the corporate or enterprise networks above, and allows for both sides to securely exchange data or resources with each other without just leaving the door wide open between the networks. So the most typical use cases for this sort of thing is making it so it's easy, but in a secure manner, to get historical data out of the SCADA system, and also allowing remote access in, again, in an easy but secure manner. And then above that, level 4, you have your actual corporate or business network where your actual day-to-day work as an employee gets done. And finally, level 5 is usually just represented by the internet or everything else out there in the world. And then just one important note on this, though, is that this is purely a theoretical model. It's a reference architecture. It may not exactly fit your system. Your system might be too small even to have some of the things that's called out. You may also have your own very specific requirements that necessitate variations to it. And that's okay, because again, it's just a theoretical model. But the important thing to take away with this, again, is the concept of segmentation of your network. And why does that matter? Well, if you notice between each of those layers that are there, there's a firewall graphic that's shown. And by segmenting the network, then that allows you to place a firewall in between those networks to have complete control over the traffic that traverses between each segment. So what that gives you then, if one segment was compromised somehow, the others are safe. Other benefits that you might see is performance. For example, the higher layers, especially where you have things like Windows operating systems and other those kind of like back-end services running, those generate usually a lot more traffic. They're a lot noisier. And by keeping that stuff segmented to its own network, you keep that noisier traffic out of the PLC and process control networks, and ensuring as much stability and determinism in those as possible, which is really important sometimes for that sort of thing. And so this concept of segmentation, as well as a lot of other cybersecurity topics, some of them what I'm going to talk about in slides after this, are documented in IEC and ISA standards, particularly IEC 62443. The counterpart to that is ISA 99. And Michael's presentation later on is actually going to cover a bit more of the topics in that as well. So where this leads to, the topic of firewalling then, is again, achieving that control of the traffic between segments. And to do that really requires you to understand what data flows you have, So you can write firewall rules to allow that traffic. And that's a really important word there, allow, because the most secure configuration is the one where the acceptable traffic is whitelisted or allowed, and all other traffic is denied by default. So to just kind of give a comparison here, a typical IT side firewall, like the one that would border the internet, will usually use more of a blacklist concept. So your corporate PC would be allowed to access whatever it wants on the internet, except maybe for a specific few websites that are blocked. And this is done because with just how much stuff is out there on the internet, it's impossible to account for every single traffic destination. But if we compare that to an OT system, however, is typically very static and also very well defined in terms of what devices are talking to what. And this is what makes the whitelist approach achievable. And that's, again, the most secure option. So as an example, if you know that your SCADA servers are going to be talking to your PLCs via Modbus, you write a rule that allows that. But you wouldn't expect them at that point to attempt any other form of communication with that PLC or some other protocol other than Modbus. So it's okay that everything else is blocked by default. And kind of on the flip side of that, if looking at your traffic logs, you see that those SCADA servers all of a sudden are attempting to communicate with those PLCs in some sort of other protocol other than Modbus, that might actually be an indicator of compromise. And that's kind of one of the key topics I'm going to cover right at the end as well. Next. The next topic I want to talk about is virtualization and software role segregation. Virtualization nowadays is essentially really a fundamental building block of computing systems, and is really something you should consider using if you aren't right now. And now, this isn't a presentation on virtualization, but to kind of quickly summarize, virtualization allows you to take full advantage of your computing resources within your physical servers, because it allows you to run multiple virtual computers on a single physical computer. And because of that approach, it can bring many benefits in terms of ease of management, maintenance, recovery, increased reliability. But I want to talk about a specific aspect, and that is the increase in security it provides. So similar to the concept of segregating the devices on your network into different zones, you can also segregate the software you run onto different virtual machines. And that's where virtualization plays a key role, because it provides a very easy and powerful way to do that sort of thing. So as an example, if you have a machine that's set up as a domain controller, would you really also want to install a SCADA client on it? Because what if that SCADA client was compromised? Well, your entire domain is now compromised, and essentially that's game over for your system at that point. So instead, we would set up separate virtual machines for each functional component of the system. A typical setup, what that could look like would be you have a separate machine for domain controllers, a Windows Update server, a backup server, a management server, your SCADA servers that run your system, your SCADA client terminal servers, if you use that sort of thing, a historian server, a report server, et cetera. So separating those different pieces of software that serve a different function into different machines. And to kind of summarize then, the benefits, what that gets you just, again, beyond security is improved performance, because by segregating that sort of stuff, you can dedicate a smaller amount of resources to things that only need a smaller amount of resources. And you can also dedicate a large amount of resources to things that need a large amount of resources. It also creates additional redundancy, because virtual machines can dynamically float between hosts if failures occur, or if you're taking something down for maintenance. It allows for easier backup and recovery, because being virtual, they are just kind of images of a machine sitting on a disk that is easy to back up and easy to restore. And then most importantly, to summarize the security point, is that by doing this, it creates and enforces additional security boundaries at the software level beyond just the network level. And doing this sort of thing, this layered approach, there's a term for that known as defense in depth. And that's something that, again, Michael's going to expand a little bit on in his presentation after this. Next. Okay, the next one is documentation. This is the one thing that everyone loves to hate. You may hate to do it, but documentation really is key to understanding how your network works. If you can't understand how it works, you probably can't draw it on paper. So it's important, especially where you have a team involved with management of the system. Remember what I talked about before about IT and OT groups working together jointly to manage these sort of systems. It prevents it all from being in one person's head, which is kind of the problem of institutional knowledge. And it also allows for easy training of new employees because it's all documented. They can read and see for themselves what's going on. So typical things you want to document are, one, obviously your actual network layout. And it's important to lay out both the physical side of this, being your switches, your patch panels, your cables, where things are plugged into, but also the logical side of it in terms of what are your actual network segments, what are connected to those segments, and then what are the data paths and flows between those different devices. The next thing you want to make sure to have documented, obviously, is a list of all your IP addresses and what's assigned to it. Helps you prevent conflicts and know where things are and aren't. You want to document all of your virtual machines. What are the resource assignments? What hosts do they run on? This is also usually useful as kind of a pre-engineering exercise to make sure you're actually sizing your physical computers right for what you need to run, so you don't buy too much or you don't end up too short. And then you also want to obviously document your firewall rules too, because that serves the basis of configuration for what traffic needs to be allowed and not. That's how you understand what your data flows are. And then also to your policies and procedures, which is almost an entirely other topic on its own. But for example, that could be things like acceptable usage policies, new user setup procedures, your backup and restoration procedures, and many other things. Next. Next topic I want to talk about is user access and privileges. So this really in the end is a pretty simple concept, but it goes a very, very long way towards securing your system. It's a very important tenet of cybersecurity. And what that really means is that everyone gets their own accounts. That includes operators, engineers, system administrators, integrators, manufacturers, whoever touches the system gets their own account. And obviously that then necessitates there are no shared accounts, there are no shared passwords. You don't want to do that. Because having separate accounts allows for each user to be assigned a role appropriate to their level of access. So system administrators are administrators, operators can only operate, engineers can only engineer, integrators can only integrate. Access control should also exist within the SCADA software as well as the operating system. So for example, establishing SCADA privilege levels like level 1 operators, level 2 operators, supervisors, technicians, and that sort of thing. But also having privileges set up on the back end, the Windows operating side as well, like system administrators, domain administrators, people with RDP access to machines and that sort of thing. And so Active Directory is really the tool you want to leverage to achieve this and enforce that sort of thing, because it allows you to create a centralized database of user accounts that can be used across any machine joined to that domain. It allows you to define security groups then that match those different access levels that you've identified. And then those groups can typically be integrated, obviously, into the Windows operating system, but also your SCADA software as well to easily manage those different privilege levels and who has access to what. Next, I'll talk about remote access. So as I mentioned before, remote access really is the new reality, especially after what has happened with COVID this past year. And unfortunately, though, it's actually very easy to set up remote access badly and really open yourself up to compromise. The phrases like just install TeamViewer or just install or just open up RDP to the internet. Those are like the most common pitfalls and are definitely not secure options. You may have even heard in the news recently about a water treatment plant that was compromised remotely because of their insecure usage of TeamViewer for remote access, and they were sharing passwords and things like that. So what's wrong with TeamViewer or other internet-based remote access software like LogMeIn or the many others that are out there? And I just said it, they're all internet-based. They require the machine to have an active internet connection, which again, if you're following proper segmentation principles, like I talked about before, your SCADA machines are not going to have internet access. And most importantly, they give the keys of the kingdom to a third party, which you have no control over, and which in the past, there have been documented cases of compromise of those providers. And then also the other one, what's wrong with opening up RDP to the internet? Well, the authentication mechanism for RDP, that protocol is not very robust. There have been many well-documented cases out there currently and in the past of compromise where malicious actors have either brute forced passwords or abused other vulnerabilities in the protocol to quote unquote break through the front door, essentially with really not much effort at all. So how do you set this up correctly then if those aren't options? Well, there's kind of 3 steps you need to do. And And step one is to set up a VPN tunnel to encrypt all of your traffic and, most importantly, enforce access control from the outside world. And that should terminate on your corporate network, which, again, if you're doing it right, is the only network that has internet access allowed and really should be the only point that that VPN is allowed to terminate on. Step two is you need to double secure that VPN access through the use of a second factor of authentication. So you're probably already familiar with this concept. A lot of websites, especially banks and things, are now requiring you to enter a code from your cell phone after you enter the password. So you can set up a very similar thing for VPN authentication. And this ensures that if your password is stolen, a malicious actor can't just use it unless they also have your authentication device as well, which is a lot less likely. And then the final step is to, again, like I talked about in the different segments before, utilize the DMZ network to securely permit the remote access from the VPN tunnel to the SCADA network, because there shouldn't ever be a direct connection between the two for all the reasons I talked about previously in terms of segmentation best practices. Next. Next topic is obsolescence. Why do we care about that sort of thing? Well, the older something is, the more insecure it likely is, and the more likely it may then actually just be used against you in the event of a compromise. How do you effectively combat this? Well, you start with an inventory of all your connected hardware and software. Make a list of everything you own. Then you want to research what the end of support date is, which for most manufacturers, they publish just directly on their website. Then based on those dates, you want to create a replacement schedule based on what you find. So what is the interval for upgrading each of these pieces? And finally, and most importantly, then you need a budget for that. So you're prepared to upgrade when the time comes. So for example, kind of on average, are you budgeted to replace your computers every 5 to 7 years? Are you budgeted to upgrade your Windows operating systems every 6 to 8 years? Are you budgeted to upgrade your SCADA software version every 3 to 4 years? And are you budgeted to upgrade your PLC and automation hardware every 12 to 15 years? So all things to consider. And like I said, most importantly, you need to understand this so you can actually budget for it. Okay, so I kind of want to close with what I've talked about so far with kind of a very important concept. And I understand that everyone here is going to be at varying levels of best practice based on what I talked about. Some of you may still be at the stage where you need to establish some of the more basic things I started with. Some of you may already have a very well-secured system. And for those that are, what can truly take you to the next level of cybersecurity is the concept of active defense. Setting up all the things I just talked about is really only half the battle. On its own, it can only passively defend you from threats, but passive defense is not going to protect you nowadays from the most malicious things out there. And that's where the concept of active defense comes in. And really what that means is you need to be continually involved in the system, and that's every day in the defense of it. So that means reviewing software logs for unexpected errors, reviewing access logs for unexpected access or password brute force attempts, reviewing firewalls for denied network traffic that could indicate suspicious activity, and maintaining your system by keeping it up to date with the latest patches, updates, and firmware revisions. Because if you're only letting your system be passively defended, then you can only be reactionary to any sort of compromise. By actively defending it, then you are actually proactively preventing compromise. And the final point, since no system is ever perfect in the end, you can't assume that when the inevitable compromise does happen, you need to be prepared for it. So do you have an established incident response plan? Meaning, do you know who is in charge? What is your procedure for restoration? Who needs to be contacted when this sort of thing happens? And you have excellent documentation, right? So you can rebuild your system from scratch, going back to that point. And then finally, what I want to mention is with everything I just talked about, how do you figure out where you stand today? Well, the Department of Homeland Security, CISA, which is Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, they publish a tool called the CSET, which is the Cybersecurity Evaluation Tool. And this is freely available to download off their website. And this is an audit tool that will help you identify and prioritize your cybersecurity weaknesses. And I just want to highlight first, most importantly, what this isn't. So it doesn't provide you the total picture or a holistic assessment. It's mainly just benchmarking you against published standards. It's also not a vulnerability scanner. It doesn't scan your network for what you have and tell you what's wrong with it. It's really merely just a guided tool that walks you through this audit. You provide all the information to it in the form of answers to questions that it asks. So how it works is, one, you select standards that are applicable to your system, your industry that you're in. You determine a severity level, basically, what level to that standard you're trying to achieve. And then it's going to ask you a ton of questions. And this is like I mentioned, the primary way that it gathers information. And then once you answer all those questions, it's going to give you kind of a report or infographic assessment of how you stack up against that standard. And then you can take that information and read through it and understand where you fall short, and then use that as a means to prioritize on what you want to work on next.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. Those are some really good, very tangible tips. And again, for anybody that has questions or wants a little bit more info, throw your questions in the Q&A spot, and we'll be addressing those towards the end. So just before we transfer over to Michael and Moxa, we really want to thank them for partnering with us and bringing this information to the end user community. Obviously, as an integrator, we're very focused on designing and building systems with end users. From the manufacturer's perspective, and Michael will talk about this, there are a lot of standards out there, and how do these devices incorporate those standards and allow you to build that network? And a lot of what Michael will share is pretty universally applicable. Again, he's from Moxa. They'll highlight some things within their product line, but you talk about Cisco or Rockwell or Palo Alto or FortiGate or other things out there, or software, a lot of the same concepts can ring true. So Michael, over to you.
All right. Thanks, Luke. Alex, good job. That was excellent. So let me share my screen here. Let me know if you can see it, please.
Looking good.
All right. Okay. Hi, everybody. Michael Cochran here from Moxa. And I wanted to, first of all, I want to really thank Luke and Alex for having me here today. And I wanted to give you sort of a vendor's perspective and, kind of from our angle, best practices for a secure and reliable network, and some of the things that we have to consider, and some of the decisions that we've made going forward to really be a trusted partner and supply secure equipment out there. So if you are not familiar with Moxa, just very quickly, we are a manufacturer of industrial grade communication equipment. So it's network infrastructure, all types of connectivity. Out on the edge, you'll hear the expression edge to core. So we connect all those devices with serial converters, serial to Ethernet. We protocol gateways with Modbus, DNP3, you name it. We've got wireless. So essentially, we help build that data highway. We provide that highway where that data has got to get somewhere and get there securely. So that puts kind of a big responsibility on us. So that's kind of a high level view of what we do. More specifically, a little deeper drill down here is, as you can see, we've got 3 different product categories, and under each one, there's a lot of products listed there. So we can be a big part of the connectivity that makes up somebody's network, to say the least. And so, with that, it only makes sense that we bear a lot of responsibility for making sure that our customers have a solution that is robust, reliable, scalable, and secure. If I can just repeat the words that Alex said earlier, it was, robust, reliable, scalable, and above all, secure, because that really matters in today's world, as as connectivity is increasing. Let's take a look just at a typical example here. In this case, it's a water wastewater example. So it's got some critical networking requirements. So 24/7 by 365 operation. Of course, we want to be able to do remote network management because it's probably pretty wide area. We want from one central location to be able to manage this network and all of our devices and all of our connectivity. We're probably going to have to deal with some legacy assets out there and get those integrated into today's more current technologies, there's still a lot of devices out there that were never designed in the first place to be put onto onto today's IT network. And now they have to be. So there's challenges and requirements that go with that. And then of course, network security is a huge requirement. And when you're presented with these requirements, the challenges that come with that from a vendor standpoint and even from the end user is the environment can also be very harsh. One that we see a lot is the increase of network complexity is outpacing the expertise of typical controls engineers. And that's definitely one we see quite a bit. There's interoperability with those legacy devices and current devices and with legacy OT versus IT. And Alex kind of gave you a good example of that. And then network security is obviously a big challenge that we have to address. So the trend today, you hear the word smart all the time, right? So smart cities, smart regions, smart this, but what that really is it's getting everything connected. So step one, get all those devices connected because somebody wants to get all this process data, real time back somewhere. This data means something to somebody. But step one, you got to get everything connected, get all those devices connected, and then it's got to travel along some type of infrastructure, some type of data infrastructure that needs to be, again, robust, reliable, of course. If you need the data real time, it's got to be reliable. It's got to be secure. It's got to be able to get to you real time. And then ultimately, it back to wherever it's going to go. And it's all about, for process improvement, reduction in downtime, increasing your overall operational efficiency. That's what it's all about. And in doing that, it's great. This is the way everything's going. But what that also does is once everything's connected, it also opens you up to more vulnerabilities because you've got more connectivity. And so you have to start asking yourself, who can access my network? We've got, Tim, the remote tech here, but then we've also got this other Tim, the remote tech, and he's doing what he does. And we know that he's out there, and we know that there's plenty of other guys just like him out there. But the reality is that remote access is indeed a security risk. There's a right way and a wrong way to do it. And there's things like lack of authentication, lack of encryption, lack of access control, very much like this incident we just saw in Florida in the water industry. So, it starts to beg the question, how much security do I need? And where do I start, right? So how do I do this? How much do I need? I need to protect all my devices. I need to protect, maybe even at what we call the distribution level. And then of course, back at the core and what's a good practice? How much do I need? And I think, one of the best analogies I can give to that is, if you think back, 1,000 years in the medieval days, you had your castle and it was a defense in depth approach. It wasn't just one thing. It was a multi-layered, multifaceted approach. So, just think back to, you had the invaders coming in and they encounter a portcullis and a drawbridge. And if the people inside lifted up that drawbridge, well, now they've got a moat they have to get across. And they get across that moat and they come to an outer wall. There's another layer, right? And if somehow they can get past that outer wall, now they come to an inner wall and they're contained in there. And then you got the guys that are up in the tower ready to pour boiling oil on them, right? So there's all these layers and all these different angles where they have to get past all this, right? So that same concept applies 1,000 years later. So if you take that same concept and put it into a SCADA network like this, if we start on the bottom here, you've got, think of this as your drawbridge or your moat. You've got all your devices and they're connecting into, all these switches here, and then it's got to go back. We got to secure the network down. So we got to secure the devices and we got to secure the network. And then, one that I think gets not touched upon enough and overlooked is security management and how do you do that and what does that mean and how can you make it easy so that you really have to think and apply all of this. And this is the approach that Moxa tries to take because again we're the guys that all the devices plug into our equipment, so it's kind of on us to be a part of the security that we're providing, right? So not just up to the end user to figure out how to lock it down. So, and so again, that's defense in depth. And I think if you are really going to practice defense in depth, I think one of the best things that you can do is look at following a standard. And why do I say that? Because if you're following a standard, it gives you a really good foundation that you can use and implement today, but it gives you something that you can build upon for tomorrow. So rather than just taking a bunch of products and trying to figure out how to lock them down, let's follow a standard that has requirements and minimums in place for you to set into your network and build upon this over time, because we all know that the complexity of security will only increase. I'm pretty sure Alex will agree with me when I say there's no finish line to this, right? But we do need to be able to have something we can continue to build upon over time, because there's always going to be breaches in security. So the ICS CERT, which is Industrial Control Systems, the Cyber Emergency Response Team. And again, I'm using an example from the water industry here, but this is a list of their recommendations that they recommend in the wastewater industry, as you can see highlighted here. And so again, what Moxa has done, and they are part of Homeland Security, and we have decided as a vendor to start building our products around a standard called IEC 62443, and this is also the standard that is recommended by ICS CERT. It's not specific to any one vertical market. It's not just for the energy sector. It's not for oil and gas. It's not just for water. It applies to all industrial automation and controls. So that's one of the reasons we really like it. And let me give you a little detail on it here. So, and this is really where it affects us, and it's also why I like it, because it defines minimum requirements. If you start at the bottom, the organization it defines requirements at the component level. So it's actually defining product development requirements, technical security requirements for industrial automation control systems components. That's a big deal, because that's where it all starts. And then it's also defining system requirements. So if, this is probably more of an area of where somebody like enterprise automation is going to come into place. This is more best practices, firewalls and things like that. And then it's also defining requirements for a security management system. So this is why I really like it. It addresses those three levels. And it defines minimum requirements, and specific to us, it puts a lot of onus on the vendor. So if we just talk about at the component level, that actual switch, that router, what have you, the components that go into that, it puts the onus on the vendor that at a minimum, at an absolute minimum, following the IEC 62443 standard, we must provide these advanced security features in our products. So you've got, multiple user accounts, you got password complexity, login attempt lockouts, failed messages, sticky MAC and things like this. So, I mean, it sounds kind of basic, but ask your vendor, do they have this? Do they provide all this? Is this in place for you to build upon for the future? So that's where it really affects Moxa at the component level. And that's where we have to start. So again, that's really, when we talk about that, we're talking about down at the device level or the individual product level, right? And again, we're talking about who can log into devices. And these are some of the things you see here that it is requiring. The one that I also find to be very interesting, if you look at the last one down here, it says select device vendors that respond quickly to reported vulnerabilities. So there's actually a requirement to have a response to a breach, right? Now, at the network level, again, we're talking about best practices, be that firewalls, VLANs, VPNs, things like that. So it defines that at the network level. And then again, it's defining different requirements and best practices at the management level. So I want to take you a little bit further into that. So at this device level, We are usually talking about an unmanaged switch, or maybe some serial server or something along those lines. But it's that vulnerability management that I want to touch upon here. So at Moxa, we have something called a cybersecurity response team. And this is the process that we have in place. So the workflow goes like this. There's awareness. So somebody reports something to ICS CERT, or maybe there's some third-party researchers and they discover a vulnerability, and that gets reported. We are made aware. Now we do an investigation. We investigate that vulnerability. We try to understand the affected scope of our products, and we take action. We develop a short-term mitigation, and then we develop a long-term solution. And then, of course, we want to make that public. We want to post public vulnerability on our security advisory. And this is part of the process that we follow when we're following the standard of IEC 62443. And again, now this is a shot that's actually taken right from our website. So we release cybersecurity vulnerability details. You can actually subscribe to an RSS feed to get some of these details proactively. So it's just a really good way to be able to find this type of information and react accordingly. So I cannot emphasize enough, ask your vendor, what process do they have in place? Make sure you select vendors that do respond quickly and have a good process in place, so that it's not just you jumping through a bunch of hoops trying to figure out how to fix these problems. So now up at the network level, I mentioned this is more, not so much component and product based. This is more best practices. This is where enterprise really comes in and applies their expertise and their policies. So this is typically something you do with layer 3 devices, routers, secure remote access, which Alex pointed out, there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. So Mox's responsibility is to make sure we have products that can do this. It's up to the integrator to apply that practice, and these routers, they're going to do things like they're going to provide you with firewall capability, they're going to provide you with VPN, they're going to provide you with network address translation, and they're going to do what the name suggests. They are routers. They allow you that segmentation so you can isolate smaller sections of the network and minimize the damage that gets done by somebody who's breaching the network. And then, that top level security management, what does that mean? What exactly does security management mean? And I think if you think about all the things that we've just pointed out, how do you make this easy? I mean, this can seem a little overwhelming, right? There's a lot to be considered here. So when we do talk about security management, we are talking about the ability to visualize the network, create policies, see event logs, be able to monitor the network, be able to set it up easily, simplify it. So as I like to call it, cybersecurity simplified is probably the best explanation I can give to it here. Now, I can't speak for anyone else. I can just tell you how Moxa does it here. And what we do is we have a network software suite called MX Studio. And in that, there's two different software tools that really apply here, MX View and MX Config. And MX View is the network management tool, and then MX Config is a configuration tool. And let me show you how those two work together. So with the network management, it's an SNMP package, nothing new. That type of thing has been around for years, but it gives you a visualization of your network. Just like Alex said, if you can't draw it out on paper, it's probably hard to understand. This helps you get a visualization of it, and it'll show you the health of the network. And if a link goes down, or if a switch goes down, or you lose power somewhere, it's going to alert you. It's going to send you an event and a notification, whether that be in an email, a text, what have you. So that's your initial foundation of visualization and management. But I think one of the things that I think is lacking is visualization of maybe a little deeper details of health and those things that coincide with good security. So a lot of my customers, one of the first things that they do as a means of applying security on their network is the use of VLANs. And that's great. But VLANs, you can have a lot of different VLANs, and frankly, it can probably get a little bit confusing if you don't have it documented well. So it's really nice to have something like VLAN visualization here on the right side, where this is going to show you your VLAN IDs. It's going to show you which devices and ports are set to an access port or a trunk port. It's going to color code them accordingly. So really kind of a nice to have with the VLANs, because VLANs can get maybe a little bit complicated and detailed. And then on top of that, it's really good. We talked about a network that needs to be scalable and robust. And it's really nice if you know what your bandwidth utilization is. Not everybody has gigabit and 10 gigabit pipelines in their network, right? There's a lot of places where maybe the bandwidth isn't that good, or maybe there's a lot of video going across, and it might be creating some choke points. And you might think you have a problem out at some location, and because you can't see it well, you're not getting a good video feed, or something appears to be down. It might not really be down. You might just have your link just can't handle the bandwidth that's trying to go across it. So it's nice to have something like this, a bandwidth visualization tool, where in this case it's color coded. So dark blue means that the utilization over that link is 20% or less. But as it gets higher, it's color coded for you. So you don't want it to get into the red, obviously. And we can actually, you can actually set different thresholds so that if it gets into the yellow or the gold, for example, it can alert you. You can get an alert, again, via a trap, an email, a text, however you want it, and we will alert you that this link is getting pretty congested, and you may want to go out there and address it. So it's kind of nice to have something like that to understand the health of your links before you can say, oh, this is a security issue, right? So, and on top of that is a way of maybe really speeding things up and understanding where things are. You can actually drop a map behind this to give you, as you can see here, this is there's a highway behind this, but this to give you a real geographical representation of where these different sites are. And that's kind of a nice to have as well. So that's a kind of a basic idea of getting the health of your network, getting the visualization of your network in place. But now, what about setting all these devices up in the first place? Again, let's just say you had, I don't know, 100 sites that are going to require 100 Ethernet switches, and each switch you're going to have 8 devices connected into it, for example. That's 800 different devices. And remember all those advanced security settings I showed you? You want to be able to apply those. That's a lot to try to remember, a lot to try to apply, and maybe easy to not remember everything, maybe easy to make some mistakes along the way. So how do we make this easier? So as a vendor, how do we make this easier? And again, cybersecurity simplified, I guess, is the best way I can call it. So there's a lot to configure here. And again, it can be a little overwhelming. But here's where I think it can get a little easier, because of the fact that we're talking about a standard here that we're building on and following. So within IEC 62443, there are predefined security profiles. So as you can see here on the following the bar across, you've got high, medium, basic, open, for example. And if you want to be set to high, then on the left here, these are all the different parameters that you would need to have configured and enabled to be set to that level, which in this case is level 2. All right. If you want to be medium, then you want to be at level 1, and those are all the things you need to have configured, and basic, and so on and so on. So that's where those predefinitions get really helpful, because now we come to Moxa's configuration tool, the MX config. And what this allows you to do is you can, if everything is wired together, either on a bench or out in the field, however you want to do it, it'll discover all that equipment at once, all those switches at once, and you can just pull down to what we call a security wizard. And then just in 3 quick steps, you can walk through this. So you pull down to the security wizard, and then you drop down, and you remember those 5 predefined levels. In this case, you say, okay, I want to be set to the highest level of security, which in this case is level 2. I want all these switches to be at security level 2. And when you do that, it's going to show you all those parameters, they're going to have to be configured if you want to be set to that level. And then you hit next. And now it's going to show you of those parameters in green, this is what is already configured. The ones in red, those aren't configured yet. Let's select them, change it, hit apply, and boom, you just changed the parameters of, you just changed the security settings of 100 switches, 50 switches all at once in however many you're doing, and you did it in just a couple of minutes. It makes it somewhat mistake proof, saves you a lot of time. So, and again, it's following those built-in security profiles. So that's all good. We got them configured, or we think we do, right? We think we have them configured because we did this setup here. So how do you know that? How do you know? How do you go in and check in on that? So, you know, maybe once a day, once a week, once a month, you want to come into the office, and the first thing you want to do is check out those security settings, make sure you haven't had some type of an issue. So, you know, back to that network management software, MX View, there's a feature in there called Security View, and you just select that, and that's going to go out there and it's going to ping every device out there, and it's going to look at it and it's going to check it for whichever security profile it's been set to, and it's going to come back to you and show you a color-coded representation of whatever level you're at. So it's kind of a nice way to do, I'll call it like a light security policy audit. You know, it gives you a chance to understand if you have anything that maybe is not configured the way you want to have it configured and set where you want it. You can track newly added devices and of course get, you know, alert notifications, understand config changes, authentication failures, things like that. So really a nice to have. And then, you know, it's also nice if you can provide some type of summary page, like a network health summary page that summarizes, you know, the device summary, you know, devices that maybe needed some attention, you know, anything that might be impacting reliability, disk space utilization, all that. It's really nice to have this, I'll call it a network health report card, if you will. So something that's quite, you know, thorough and inclusive. And then, you know, lastly, it wouldn't be complete if we didn't include those people that are out in the field, because not many operations people just sit there at the desk all day watching their network. A lot of them are out there in the field on the go, in addition to being back in the control center. So another thing that we do is with this network management software, when it sends events or alerts or anything like that, we can make sure that it sends it to the same app on your cell phone, so that when you're out there on the go, you're getting these alerts and these notifications real time. You're able to, if things got corrected, you'll know about it. So it's a chance to, I guess, just get things done quicker, address them quicker, understand that there was an issue, get somebody on it. So you know, we can do it out in the field as well as right there in the office. So that, you know, that's a little rundown on the vendor's perspective. So it's you know, it's increased network visibility, and we really have to look at things from the component and the device level, the network infrastructure level, and then the management level, and following the predefined requirements, minimums of IEC 62443, and that's why Moxa has really decided to take that step and develop our products around a standard like that. And that's all I had. So back to you, Luke.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Michael. Appreciate it. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Alex. Yeah, and so just in the last few minutes we have, if anybody has any questions pertaining to, you know, what some of the topics were, or anything within the cybersecurity networking aspect of what you guys may be dealing with, shoot them out. I guess one of the first ones that came through, I'll throw it out, maybe Alex, for you to kind of start with. What about disaster recovery? How would an end, you know, you kind of talked about if something occurs and there's a threat or there's a failure, how do you deal with disaster recovery? What would you say to that?
Yeah, the first thing you have to figure out really is what level of disaster recovery do you need, and that usually comes in terms of identifying what is your recovery objective. So for the least critical systems out there, you may say, yeah, if I had this back up and running in a couple days, that's probably acceptable. For a lot of SCADA systems out there, again, depending on the criticality, you may say, yeah, we can, as long as we have it back up within a couple hours, we're okay. Or maybe even the most production critical systems out there, you may say, I can't handle more than a couple minutes of downtime without major issue. So identifying that up front then really drives then what the solution needs to be in terms of disaster recovery. And so from kind of a most typical setup point of view, that usually comes in the form of having a really robust backup solution, meaning you're taking backups daily. You are storing those in multiple locations, including offsite and offline locations in case of the worst happening. And then again, for those most critical solutions, then you may even consider having some sort of offsite or secondary data center that is running your system. Meaning using software tools out there, again, if you're using virtualization to replicate those virtual machines to an offsite location, that can even be done continuously, every even 5 minutes, you're replicating the state of those virtual machines over. And there are many, many other technologies too that can help you achieve that sort of thing. But again, it really kind of comes down to what are your requirements in terms of speed of recovery, because then that obviously drives the cost and effort in terms of implementing that solution. And then just kind of more from the cybersecurity side of things too, obviously, having those sort of backups is what allows you to recover easily in the event of compromise. And that also kind of goes along too with having the actual policies and procedures around what that process looks like defined ahead of time. So, and even rehearsed too yearly is another concept to really be able to effectively mitigate that sort of thing when the worst happens.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We've seen a lot of people really benefit from the virtualization aspect. While it's not completely cutting edge anymore, having that in your system makes backups much easier, restorations much easier. So yeah, definitely. Another question comes in, and maybe for both either Alex or Michael, whoever wants to jump in. What about trying to secure, if you have a system with remote sites and you're looking at using cellular, how would you use or secure like cellular, the use of cellular communications if it's part of your scheme?
Yeah, so I'll mention real quick. A typical setup for that usually then is one, working with your wireless vendor to actually set up a private cellular network, meaning they, kind of going back to the concept of segmentation, they create your own little private segment network within their cellular network that is not on the internet. It's not a part of the public cellular network space. It is dedicated to you. But, as with any other third-party communications vendor, again, whether that's cellular or even fiber internet service providers, it's not your network, it's their network in the end. So you need to also take steps to have kind of a measure above that, which usually means establishing VPN tunnels between the sites as well, and other firewalling and security policies, just to make sure that, again, in the event the worst happens, even though your cellular network is private, if it was still somehow breached, you are still protected on the front door, so to speak, and ready for that sort of thing if it does.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Anything to add, Michael?
Not really, other than I completely agree with Alex on that. So like he said, work with the vendor. So it's there's more than one way to skin a cat, and it's up to a vendor like myself to be able to provide a product that gives the features and functionalities that you're going to use to put that in place. So
yeah. Excellent. Well, appreciate again, Alex, Michael, thank you for the time and for the information. Hopefully for those of you in attendance, you found something useful. If you have more questions, please reach out to us. As a systems integrator focused in water and wastewater and other industries where cybersecurity is really important, it's our pleasure to work with end customers to find solutions that meet their budget, meet their timeline, meet their criteria. So please reach out. Again, thank you for attending, and stay safe.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.